Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us for today's virtual book signing with Dr. Melanie Peffer, author of Biology Everywhere. Before we get started, I just want to let you all know that Melanie's book is available for sale at the museum store and online at fcmod.org/store. If you purchase a copy of Biology Everywhere in our online store, you can request to have your book signed as well. Purchases at the museum store support our mission to create meaningful opportunities to learn, reflect, and have fun. Now, without further ado, let's bring on Melanie and get started with the show. Hi,
Hello.
Melanie.
Hello.
How are you?
I'm good. How are you doing?
Doing good. How about you? Oh, wait, I already asked you. Anyways, we're happy to have you on for our virtual book signing and have you talk about your book.
Yeah, thank you for having me. And thank you everyone for being here too.
Would you mind telling us a little bit about yourself and I guess what inspired you to write Biology Everywhere?
Yeah, sure. So I'm a master biology educator. There's no way around it. I've been teaching biology for a long time. I've been researching how people learn biology for a long time too. And I wrote Biology Everywhere because I had run into too many people who felt like they couldn't do it. I just got tired of hearing so many people say, I'm not smart enough to do science. I can't do it. I'm afraid to take biology classes. And I really wanted to change those attitudes, not only because I'm super excited about biology, but because we don't really have a choice but to engage with biology as part of our daily lives. That's something that really came to the forefront with the COVID pandemic, and everybody had to make biologically minded decisions.
Well, would you like to dive into how we can find biology everywhere?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm telling just one story from my book today, and that is dealing with how biology intersects with other disciplines. Because one thing that I love so much about coming to the Museum of Discovery is how it almost seamlessly connects very different disciplines to one another. And the FC Mod, for those of you who haven't been there before, it's part history museum, part science museum, part children's museum. And I love the intersection of all of those disciplines, which is a main part of my book. And so again, like I was saying in the beginning, Biology Everywhere is about making biology accessible. Biology Everywhere is the science of life as told through our everyday experiences and as it intersects with other disciplines, such as music, which is going to be the main thing I'm talking about tonight. So the philosophy behind my book is that if we present biology from the standpoint of our shared daily experiences, and as it intersects with other disciplines, so business or music or psychology, it becomes more accessible and more relatable. And when it's accessible and relatable, people feel empowered to engage with it. People feel more confident. When you realize that when you cook bacon, for example, you're doing protein biochemistry in your kitchen, suddenly it doesn't seem that scary anymore because it's something that you're doing in your house, in your kitchen as part of your lives. And so I'm not going to be talking as much about the biology everywhere as part of our daily lives. It's in the book. I'm happy to answer questions about it. It's in some of my other recorded talks. I'm mostly going to be talking about intersection with other disciplines. And this was to be in conjunction with the special exhibit that was recently at the museum on the Mind Matters. And so I'll mostly be talking about the intersection of biology, the arts, and neuroscience today, with a special focus on music and also drawing. Okay, so let's think about music and the human experience. So in the chat window, can you tell me right now, is there a piece of music that you find really moving? What makes it moving to you? What is that piece of music? So Madison, I know we have a delay, so I guess you get to go first. What's a piece of music that you find very moving?
Ooh, I think the one that I always go back to is Clair de Lune. That's just like my all-time favorite. I drop everything if it comes on and just listen to it.
That's such a beautiful piece. I always like the version that was at the very end of Ocean's 11, if you know which one I'm talking about.
Yeah.
There's also a version of that for organ that Virgil Fox did. If you haven't heard that one, it's worth looking up. See if you can find it on YouTube.
Add both of those to my list.
Yes. Yes, and I pose this question. I hear Clair de Lune quite a bit. See if anybody else agrees or has a different one to suggest. So we'll give it a few more seconds just to allow for the lag. Then we can always come back to it too. So I can see the comment window. Did anybody else chime in?
I think that is it for now.
Okay, well, if you think of something, feel free to share it. So one of mine is Samuel Barber's Adagio for strings. And whenever I hear it, I go straight back to the very first time that I heard it. It was actually in February. Actually, it was probably either today, maybe yesterday, was the 16-year anniversary of this. I was at a honors band event, and someone had donated tickets for us to all go see the symphony. So this is in Pittsburgh. So this is a picture of the Pittsburgh Symphony. It was my very first time attending a symphony before. And they did Adagio for strings in the first half, and they did pictures at an exhibition in the second half. So this piece always it builds and it's beautiful. And so for anybody who's not familiar with it, I'm going to play just a short clip so you can hear it. So you can see how this piece grows, and it's a very emotional, moving piece. So when we feel music and it moves us, what is happening? And it comes down to a neurotransmitter called dopamine. So I actually have my little dopamine molecule that I bought at the museum store. And so dopamine is a neurotransmitter. So it's a chemical that helps transmit signals in our brain. And it's involved in pleasure and reward, as well as things like addiction and Parkinson's disease. And when we listen to music and we feel that feeling, it's because of dopamine. And so scientists actually found that if you blocked dopamine release, music doesn't feel good anymore. You don't have that emotional response. You don't get chills anymore when you listen to music. But if you increase dopamine release, music sounds just even more incredible. It's more of an emotionally moving experience. But not all music gives us the best feelings in the world. So we lived in Atlanta prior to moving to Colorado, and I played with the Seed and Feed Marching Abominable Band. So here we are at the 4th of July, the summer before we moved to Atlanta. I'm back here in the corner. And 4th of July meant that we played The Stars and Stripes Forever by John Philip Sousa. So, you know, it's the national march. I play the piccolo. I've had to play this piccolo solo many, many times. And so if you look carefully at the music, you can see it and all the trills and all the ups and downs. And it's a very difficult solo to play. And everybody knows it. And everybody knows if you mess it up. And so to this day, if I hear this march, my blood pressure goes through the roof. So why is that? And it doesn't have to do with dopamine. It has to do with classical conditioning. So if you've had psychology class before, you've learned about classical conditioning. If you've ever trained a pet, you've learned about classical conditioning. And so this was made famous by Pavlov and his dogs. And so we have what's called the unconditioned stimulus. So the dog, when he sees the food, starts to salivate, and that's the unconditioned response. But if a dog hears a whistle blow, this is the neutral stimulus. It doesn't mean anything. But if you pair the neutral stimulus with the unconditioned stimulus, then the dog starts to associate the sound of the whistle with food and salivating. And eventually the dog can be conditioned so that anytime he hears the whistle, he starts to salivate. So if you think about this in terms of Stars and Stripes Forever, you might hear it and think, oh, 4th of July picnics, lovely. Whereas I hear it and it feels like doom. It's because that was originally a neutral stimulus, but after having to play it from memory, standing in front of people so many times, they now have this conditioned response to it where it makes me very, very nervous. Okay. So how else does music intersect with our biology? There's research suggesting that if you listen to music while you run, your running performance is better. There's research that suggests if we listen to music while we work, it's easier to concentrate. One of my favorite pieces to listen to while I work is Plantasia. So you can go look it up on YouTube. It's really fun. So it's music for plants, but I find that it just really is the ticket if I'm doing something hard and need to concentrate. There's also the association for music therapy as well, because there's evidence that suggests for people with memory-related disorders like Alzheimer's, it can really help. Music memories are very durable. They're some of the last to go. And also, again, relating back to the museum's recent special exhibition on Mind Matters, it can really help people with neuropsychiatric conditions, with anxiety, with depression as well. There's also evidence suggesting that playing music for preemies in the NICU can also help them need less medical intervention as well. So music's a very powerful part of our lives. So before I go on, I want to stop real quick and see if there are any questions.
So Melanie, I have a question.
Okay.
What's the science behind music helping with kind of this development in people of all ages?
Yeah, so I'll get more into that in just a minute, but when we think about it in terms of children's development, and so I think at the beginning there's a picture of my son at music class, and I'll show that again in just a minute, because it helps children get the gross motor development, so being able to pick up mallets, for example, and hammer them around, and also that finer motor coordination. So I'll show a picture as well in a minute of my son sitting at the piano and plunking at the keys. It also helps with executive function, so being able to stop hitting the drum when you're supposed to, so that ability to kind of stop and wait. And so it's really helpful for children's development. And it's also soothing and feels good, so I'll talk a little bit in a minute as well about how it can make us feel closer and in community with others.
Then one other question. When people have, and I guess this kind of goes back to the Pavlov's dog theory, but when people have kind of a preference or maybe a disdain towards certain genres of music, do you think that might kind of like, are there certain stimuli that might impact someone's taste in music over time?
That is a great question. And I've been asked that question before. And I think it's probably a mix of factors. I think there's certain music that we gravitate towards, and that's why we see a lot of music, especially pop music, has very similar chord structures to it, because that's just what people really like to listen to. But then you get into some different cultures, and some Eastern music has a lot of the tritones in it, and it sounds very strange for us who mostly listen to Western music. And of course, there's that classical conditioning too of relating it to good memories. So people tend to like the stuff they listened to when they were younger, or went to prom, if that was a good memory or not. But I think that comes up as well too.
I think that's all we've got.
Okay, well, if anybody thinks of any questions, anytime, just put it in the chat window. All right, so we talked about listening to music and the value of listening to music, but what about playing music? So I was wondering, do we have any musicians here? And if you are a musician, what do you play? And so Madison, my question for you, while we wait to see if anybody chimes in, is do you play an instrument? And if you don't, what's your favorite instrument to go and play at the museum?
Ooh, well, I used to play in middle school and high school. I did play clarinet and saxophone, but more recently at the museum, I'd have to say, ooh, I kind of enjoy probably playing on the trios and the drums. The drums are pretty cool. I enjoy those ones. We also just had a question come in from Susie. They say, I find it amazing. I love to listen to classical instrumental while I'm writing a technical document. Is there a connection?
Another really good question, because like I mentioned that I really like listening to that plant music while I'm concentrating, but I also know people who can't listen to music at all while they work because they focus on the music instead and how the music's put together. So I wonder how much of that is personal preference versus there being some real science behind why certain music helps us concentrate better.
Also have some budding instrumental musicians. We have someone who is trying to learn the ukulele, and then we also have someone who used to play the flute.
Oh, very nice. It's never too late to learn a new musical instrument, for sure. All right, wonderful. Well, I'm glad we have some musicians in the audience. So I have been playing flute for a long time. So this is me with that same wacky band in Atlanta. So we were playing at Dragon Con here. And I've made some of my best friends through band. So I met my husband through band in high school. It's Friday night, which means I'll be getting together with band friends in Atlanta for games tonight, even though we've been in Colorado for over 4 years now. Where does that sense of connection come from? Is it just because we're sharing an experience together? Is it because of a shared value system? So for example, you can see that we are all dressed up in very interesting outfits here. So what is it about playing music and making music together? And so there's actually been research done by a group in Sweden showing that singers, people who sing together, synchronize their heart rates. And so it's more than just an emotional connection we have when we make music with others. We're actually physiologically connecting with them. And so there's also this idea of breathing together synchronizes our heart rates. It's also a way that we can calm down as well. So if you count the amount of time it takes for somebody to pray the rosary, if you happen to be Catholic, that's the amount of time that you need to start to calm down. And that's why if you ever end up in the hospital because you're having a panic attack, because a lot of times when people have a panic attack, they end up in the emergency room because they think they're having a heart attack. They have you do deep breathing exercises. That's why also for people with anxiety, it's highly recommended to do these deep breathing exercises, because this monitored, metered breathing tells your central nervous system it's okay, we're safe. And so it's a really interesting way that we all get physiologically connected when we listen to music, and why music can be so relaxing, because it's building off of these same principles of why deep breathing and prayer can help people to feel calm. And it's also important to think about in terms of human evolution and human history as well. So here's some example of some ancient instruments. So it's thought that this is an important part of human evolution because playing music together brought people together. And in an early hunter-gatherer society, people who felt stronger a sense of community were more likely to survive. If you visit the museum, this is on display. So it's a Native American, oh no, I'm forgetting what it is, bear rasp, I think so. Madison can correct me if I'm wrong, but it's a local instrument, part of our history here in northern Colorado, if you'd like to go see it. So music has been a very important part of human culture for a long time. Okay, so I also made some allusions to child development. So thinking about gross motor development. So this is my son Felix, and this is at music class. And so we do music class at the Union Colony Music Academy down in Greeley. And so learning how to use the mallet to hit the chimes, for example, that's something we do at the museum quite a bit. So the gross motor skills of being able to do that. And also being able to sit at the piano and the fine motor skills of being able to use the keys and being able to, you can see how he's pushing individual keys down and not just hitting the piano. And so early music education is really important for children's development. Okay, so I'm going to pause real quickly for questions. Are there any questions that have popped up?
Seconds. There's one question that I have. When it comes to, some people learn better kind of by sound versus learning by sight. Mm-hmm. Are there any differences in which these senses function in helping us learn music?
That's another really good question. And I wonder how much it comes down to different ways of learning. And I want to be careful because there's no research that backs up learning styles, but there is something to be said about how people learn differently and how they initially start to explore the world and think about it. And so if someone's had a lot of practice learning things by ear, it's easy for them to continue learning things by ear. Whereas I'm a classically trained musician, and if I don't have sheet music, I have a very hard time.
Same.
Yeah, whereas like my brother-in-law, he plays professionally. He can hear anything and just immediately start to play it because that's what he's been doing for, I don't know. It's been a while though. So I think it comes down to training and skill, the style of music that you're playing. So if you're more doing bar band or jazz, being able to improvise is a much stronger skill. Whereas, I've been playing things like Vivaldi and Mozart for a long time, and it's much more metered and rigid, although you can do your own little things here and there too. Okay.
That's what I got.
Then, so another fascinating way to think about playing music and science is that it's not terribly uncommon for people to be woken up in the middle of brain surgery and asked to play an instrument. So for example, if someone has brain cancer and they want to make sure they're not taking too much tissue away, if they happen to be a musician, they might be asked to bring it in because playing an instrument has been described as a whole body exercise, so to speak, for your brain. And we'll watch this video real quick too. I love this video because it's another just interesting expose about how music can help science and science can help musicians. So let's learn about this violinist's story.
To Roger Frisch, the violin is not just an instrument, it's part of him, an extension of his passion for music, beauty, and excellence. Roger's mastery of the violin has put him on the world stage. Few have reached this level of expertise. But not long ago, Roger noticed something wasn't quite right when he pulled the bow across the strings.
When I would draw my bow, I suddenly had a shake in my bow. Now, for most other professions, this would not be a concern. For being a violinist, where your career depends on the stability of your appendages, this was a great concern.
Roger has what's called essential tremor, a nervous system disorder that causes shaking. Concerned, he went to Mayo Clinic where he met neurosurgeon Dr. Kendall Lee.
And the amount of tremor he has would be considered pretty mild, but not in the case of a concert violinist.
Dr. Lee and Roger agreed that deep brain stimulation, or DBS, was their best chance at stopping the tremor. It involved placing electrodes into Roger's brain. But there was a challenge to overcome that created a first ever situation in an operating room. You see, because Roger's tremor was so small, it would be difficult for Dr. Lee and his team to tell if the electrodes they were implanting were in the best possible place to stop the tremor.
And so what we needed a violin in the operating room.
Kevin Bennett heads Mayo Clinic's Division of Engineering. His team worked with Dr. Lee's team to create a violin Roger could play while awake during surgery.
We built and designed a 3-axis accelerometer that we could attach to the bow so that as Mr. Frisch was playing, we could actually see a plot on a computer screen of the movement that really shouldn't be there.
During the procedure, Dr. Lee inserted electrodes into Roger's brain and moved them to the site where the tremor originated. Once there, electrodes fire electrical signals to hopefully stop the tremor. By measuring Roger's movements, the accelerometer told Dr. Lee if the electrodes were in the right spot. There was no guarantee it would work. Thankfully, it did work.
I thought this was a wonderful challenge to see if this technology could help in this sort of a unique situation.
I started playing right away the day I came home from Mayo. I was back playing with my colleagues with the Minnesota Orchestra 3 weeks later. Without the stimulator on, the tremor is quite pronounced.
You can see the difference. With the click of a controller, Roger can turn the electrodes on and off.
And that's as smooth of a bow as I can play right now.
But when it's on, Roger's mastery of the violin is absolutely clear.
I remain very, very thankful every day that I have had the opportunity to have had this surgery. And, I just do not take it for granted.
Back on the world stage to make music, beauty, and achieve excellence.
So I love that video because it really hits this idea home of crossing boundaries in ways that we usually don't think about before, and how a musician, an engineer, and a doctor were able to work together to come up with a workable solution so that he could continue playing the violin. Okay. Any questions? Because we're about to switch gears away from music. So we've learned about how listening to music affects who we are as people. We've learned how playing music interacts with our biology as well. And before we get into fine art, are there any questions for me?
I have a question.
Okay.
Maybe this was kind of explained, but is there one part of the brain that is kind of like the most important part when it comes to making music?
Ooh, that's a good question. So the cerebral cortex certainly comes to mind. So that's the thinking cap, so to speak. That's where a lot of the higher order thought comes on. And so that we have to think when we make music. We have to think about what we're playing and what we're doing, but there's also a lot of muscle memory in there too. And then I can't help but wonder if the amygdala has anything to do with it. So the amygdala is what processes a lot of our emotions. And this came up when I've given this talk before about what's the difference between music as a physics construct and music that really makes you feel something. And so someone who can really put a lot of emotion into the music. And I also wonder about the hippocampus as well, since that's involved in memory. And so remembering how to play music, remembering what you're supposed to do. So I think that, again, so that's 3 different areas of the brain. I'm sure we can come up with more. I'm sure someone who with a neuroscience degree can probably come up with more too. But I think it gets back to that point I made earlier that making music is very much a brain exercise. It's good for your whole brain.
We also have another question from the audience. How was the patient able to be awake during the surgery?
Yeah, so it's the interesting thing about the brain is that there's no sensation there. So you can, touch your brain and then you wouldn't feel it. So, and you notice they had his head kind of clamped in so he couldn't move. So he couldn't necessarily feel what they were doing, but it's probably better to not be awake when they're peeling the scalp off, because I don't think anybody wants to hear or see that going on. So they were able to put him to sleep, get everything into position, wake him up, and just make sure that he was being held steady and able to do the procedure.
For now.
Okay. All right, so I mentioned that we're about to switch gears. We've talked a lot about music, and I love music, near and dear to my heart. And now we're going to talk about art. So how is art foundational to biology? This usually trips people up a little bit because we think we have biology class and we think we have art class. But I'm telling you that art is foundational to biology. So what does that mean? And so I want to start out by telling you a story about a scientist named Santiago Ramon y Cajal. He was a Spanish scientist as well as an artist. And it was his drawings of neurons that led to one of the greatest discoveries in neuroscience. That's still the foundation for modern neuroscience today. And so I recently collaborated with TED Ed to produce a lesson on this topic. So let's go ahead and watch the video.
In the late 1860s, scientists believed they were on the verge of uncovering the brain's biggest secret. They already knew the brain controlled the body through electrical impulses. The question was, how did these signals travel through the body without changing or degrading? It seemed that perfectly transmitting these impulses would require them to travel uninterrupted along some kind of tissue. This idea, called reticular theory, imagined the nervous system as a massive web of tissue that physically connected every nerve cell in the body. Reticular theory captivated the field with its elegant simplicity, but soon a young artist would cut through this conjecture and sketch a bold new vision of how our brains work. 60 years before reticular theory was born, developments in microscope technology revealed cells to be the building blocks of organic tissue. This finding was revolutionary, but early microscopes struggled to provide additional details. The technology was especially challenging for researchers studying the brain. Soft nervous tissue was delicate and difficult to work with, and even when researchers were able to get it under the microscope, the tissue was so densely packed it was impossible to see much. To improve their view, scientists began experimenting with special staining techniques designed to provide clarity through contrast. The most effective came courtesy of Camillo Golgi in 1873. First, Golgi hardened the brain tissue with potassium bichromate to prevent cells from deforming during handling. Then, he doused the tissue in silver nitrate, which visibly accumulated in nerve cells. Known as the black reaction, Golgi's method finally allowed researchers to see the entire cell body of what would later be named the neuron. The stain even highlighted the fibrous branches that shot off from the cell in different directions. Images of these branches became hazy at the ends, making it difficult to determine exactly how they fit into the larger network. But Golgi concluded that these branches connected, forming a web of tissue comprising the entire nervous system. 14 years later, a young scientist and aspiring artist named Santiago Ramón y Cajal began to build on Golgi's work. While writing a book about microscopic imaging, he came across a picture of a cell treated with Golgi's stain. Cajal was in awe of its exquisite detail, both as a scientist and an artist. He soon set out to improve Golgi's stain even further and create more detailed references for his artwork. By staining the tissue twice in a specific time frame, Cajal found he could stain a greater number of neurons with better resolution. And what these new slides revealed would upend reticular theory. The branches reaching out from each nerve cell were not physically connected to any other tissue. So how were these individual cells transmitting electrical signals? By studying and sketching them countless times, Cajal developed a bold, new hypothesis. Instead of electrical signals traveling uninterrupted across a network of fibers, he proposed that signals were somehow jumping from cell to cell in a linear chain of activation. The idea that electrical signals could travel this way was completely unheard of when Cajal proposed it in 1889. However, his massive collection of drawings supported his hypothesis from every angle. And in the mid-1900s, electron microscopy further supported this idea by revealing a membrane around each nerve cell, keeping it separate from its neighbors. This formed the basis of the neuron doctrine, which proposed the brain's tissue was made up of many discrete cells instead of one connected tissue. The neuron doctrine laid the foundation for modern neuroscience and allowed later researchers to discover that electrical impulses are constantly converted between chemical and electrical signals as they travel from neuron to neuron. Both Golgi and Cajal received the Nobel Prize for their separate but shared discoveries, and researchers still apply their theories and methods today. In this way, their legacies remain connected as discrete elements in a vast network of knowledge. For researchers, one of the most...
So again, we see another example of where art, and in this case, biology in the form of neuroscience, came together to lead to one of the biggest discoveries in neuroscience. And again, as I mentioned in the video, it's still the foundation for modern neuroscience today. And so it's kind of turning this idea on its head about arts or science, when bringing both together is really important. So what are some other examples where we see this? So John Audubon, so his drawings are all in the public domain, so you can take a look at them. He set out to paint every bird species in North America. And so this is one of my favorites, a roseate spoonbill. You can go see them in Florida. So they have the spoon-shaped bill that they wiggle in the mud to scare up the food that they eat. And they turn this beautiful shade of pink in the spring during mating season. So this is one of his drawings. And importantly, he also painted the Carolina parakeet. And the Carolina parakeet has since gone extinct. And so when we think about the history of biology as a discipline, a lot of the early biologists, or naturalists as they were called then, they had to be able to draw. This is the 1800s. You couldn't just pull out your cell phone camera and take a picture. So a lot of being able to document new species came down to being able to draw accurately and quickly in the field. We also still see this today in modern biology. So this guy right here, this is Xenopus laevis, or an African clawed frog. So you can see he's got claws. It's a very common model organism. So a model organism is an animal that biologists use to study some kind of process. So in this case, Xenopus laevis is often used by developmental biologists. So people who study the process from going from a single fertilized egg to a fully developed organism. So we often think about mice, for example, in scientists and experiments. But the nice thing about using frogs or fish is that the eggs are externally fertilized. And so you can watch them under a microscope. We don't need to hurt the parents necessarily. Anyway, so if you're ever interested in developmental biology, the first thing that you do is that you're given a guide to the stages. And so with frogs, it was the Newcoop and Faber drawings. And so these are hand drawings showing the stages that a frog goes through from a fertilized egg through to the tadpole stage. So you can see the tail that's starting to form here, and eventually through metamorphosis into a frog. And so these Newcoop and Faber drawings were done many years ago. With zebrafish, it's the Kimmel drawings, which are also hand-drawn as well. But the problem with the Newcoop and Faber drawings is that all the embryos are laying on the side like this. So it's really hard to tell what kind of development's going on with the face. And craniofacial malformations, so things like cleft palate, are very, very common. So a group recently at Tufts, as in like the last couple of years, commissioned a new set of drawings to be done looking from the face on. And what's interesting is that the artist who was doing these, as she was drawing these, came up with new insights in how the face develops. And so again, showing this interface and this importance of really intentionally connecting art with science. Okay, any questions?
Melanie, I guess how often are biology drawings incorrect? Like, are there any from the past that we look back on now and say, oh no, that was completely wrong?
That's a good question.
Or are there any that stick out?
Yeah, so I can't think of anything that necessarily stick out, but the issue with drawings, and we saw this with the Newcoop and Faber drawings, is that we are limited to what the artist decided to capture. And so it's not necessarily that the drawings were wrong, it's just that it may not have been a complete picture. And so that's an interesting part of the Golgi and Kayal story too. So what's fascinating is, so in the video it said that they shared the Nobel Prize. When they gave their Nobel Prize lectures, they actually contradicted one another because they didn't actually agree on the neuron doctrine. Golgi thought it was reticular theory that everything was connected with one another, and that's what he saw when he looked at the images. So that's called confirmation bias, and we see what we want to see. Mm-hmm. Instead of what's actually there, and that could absolutely come out in people's drawings, either making them incorrect perhaps, or only highlighting things that fit into someone's prior knowledge.
Like this question that just came in, were there any biological artworks that were beyond their time?
That's another good question. And I think you could say that about Kayal, because there wasn't additional evidence to support those drawings for another, 70 years? And took until the electron microscope was developed. And so until then, it was really just his drawings and him saying, no, it's not reticular theory. So I guess you could argue that that was perhaps before his time, because a lot of people still adhered to reticular theory because it made a lot of sense, and that's just how it worked. Any other questions? So it's funny because I teach on Zoom and I ask that a lot. Do you have any questions? And so I was running a review session on a Saturday once, and my son was playing in the background. And at one point he walks into the office and says, "Mama, I don't have any more questions."
I'm glad he was participating in class.
He was
That's
participating
good.
in class, yes. My students also thought that was hilarious because I stop and ask for questions a lot.
Cool. All right, on to the next.
So I kind of want to close tonight with my thoughts on the arts as a bridge. So we've talked a lot about music and we've talked about art. We've talked about how fine art in particular has been really foundational to the field of biology. But I want to go full circle with where I started at the beginning about how people don't feel like they can engage with science and biology, and how the arts can also serve as a bridge between the two, because it is really important that we engage with biology and science. We don't have a choice to do it. It's really important for the health and welfare of society that we do it. But people feel like they can't and shut down, and they'd rather just listen to what their favorite political party says on a science issue instead of actually thinking about the science. And so I think the arts can serve as a really important bridge because it is so meaningful to us as humans. And so these are agar art images. A friend of mine at University of Alabama, Birmingham, made these for me. And so she's published and talked quite a bit on how we can make art with living things. This is the Vitruvian Man and living bacteria, and my biology everywhere played in living bacteria. And so making art with things that are alive can help bridge that gap and be a really effective way of getting kids excited about science. So the photo arc was something, it was a special exhibition at the museum. Madison, you might have to help me. This was what, 2 years ago or 3 years ago now? The photo arc.
That is a good question. Photo arc.
Is that 2018, 2019, I think?
I could be wrong. I could be wrong. But yeah, it was an exhibit that we had come through the museum.
Yeah, I absolutely love seeing the photo arc. And I think there's still photo arc books that are at the museum store. So Madison, correct me if I'm wrong. I know I bought my copy at the museum store. But Joel Sartori is a photographer with National Geographic, and his wife got cancer. And so he couldn't go out in the field anymore. And so he started going to his local zoo and taking studio portraits of the animals there, which eventually led to his goal to try and photograph all animals and create a photo arc, particularly animals that either have since gone extinct or at high danger of going extinct. And so his argument is that you're never going to get people interested in conservation if you don't look at these animals and look at them right in the eye. And then it helps people engage and build that connection so that they're more likely to save something. So something he said is you won't save something you don't love. And so he's trying to help people to love these animals, especially some of the little oddball ones. Because, you know, we always think of the charismatic lion or tiger or elephant. But what about the humble nudibranch or mice or frogs? And so it's a really fascinating project. I just got an email. It sounds like they just hit a new milestone with photographing animals as well. And it helps to raise awareness of certain issues. So plastic waste is a huge problem we're facing right now as a community. Microplastics are in all of our foods. And so what does that mean? And we have the plastic gyre in the ocean. And so this is an art installment made out of plastic waste that was pulled out of a local river to help generate awareness about waste in the community. And there's also been some wonderful music to come out. So They Might Be Giants produced a album for kids called Here Comes Science. And the very first track on it is Science is Real. And so it's another fun way to get people to start to re-engage with science a little bit. And so I think it's a really important bridge. And something that's also fun to see at the museum. So this is my son at the museum at one of the exhibits. So looking at when you add tubing, how it changes the timbre of the instruments. And I'm thinking about it, I think this one is not there currently because of COVID, but it used to be. So we're at the museum quite a bit. We've been members for the last 2 years. We're about to renew our membership for the 3rd year. And using the arts as a bridge is something that the museum does that I really appreciate. So I want to thank you for coming out tonight and spending some of your Friday night with me. I'm happy to sign books live for you, or I can drop them off at the museum. I encourage you to sign up for my mailing list. I've got a lot of other fun events coming up, including I'll be speaking at TEDxCU, and I'm about to launch a science communication course on Coursera. So that's a free course for anybody who wants to take it. So with that, thank you again for your attention. It's been great being here. I'll stick around a little bit to answer any questions, and also feel free to connect with me on social media. I'm always posting little Biology Everywhere tidbits.
So much. Yeah, appreciate having you on, Melanie. It was great.
Yeah, thanks for having me. So now I can actually see the comments window. It's always hard to wait with the delay coming in. Madison, did you have any other questions?
That is a good question. I did have one that came up, that came to mind as we were going through. And this goes back to biology drawings. How do we still do biology drawings nowadays, or is it just if you can take a picture of it, that's enough?
Yeah, it still happens. So those Zahn drawings, that was a group at Tufts, and I think that article came out maybe 2 or 3 years ago. So definitely during the age of easy digital photography. So not quite as important as it used to be, but it's still an important thing. And my students will laugh at me about my attempts to draw things. I'm not a very good artist. I'm not honoring my biology roots as much, perhaps, but I do what I can.
That's good. Camera's your friend in that instance, I bet.
For sure.
All right. I don't think we have anything else coming in, so we might be good.
Okay. Well, thank you again for having me.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I mean, we can feel free to reach out for anyone who's looking to learn more about biology everywhere.
Yeah, absolutely. And so feel free to follow me on social media, always posting information, and the book's available at the gift shop, and I'm always happy to sign copies. If you order online, you can leave a comment in the order notes. And if you buy in person, just ask Madison. She knows how to get in touch with me. I'm happy to sign your book or personalize it. So they make great gifts. I've personalized many books to especially young women who are questioning about science, and so I'm always happy to do that too.
Perfect. All right. Thanks so much, Melanie.
Thank you.